The situation in the Middle East has taken a troubling turn, particularly in Iraq, where it appears the parliament may approve a law lowering the minimum age for marriage from 18 to 9 years. If this happens, it would mean that men, even those in their 50s, could legally marry girls as young as 9. In this explanation, I will discuss how this situation arose, the social and legal context, and the political motives behind it, as well as what this law could mean for the country, especially for women in Iraq. To start, it's important to note that Iraq hasn't historically been known for strict religious laws. In the past, the country was seen as progressive in terms of gender equality compared to other nations in the region. For instance, Iraq was the first Arab country to have a female judge and a female minister, both milestones that date back to the 1950s. During that time, Iraq implemented Law 188, which governs personal status issues, including marriage. Under this law, the minimum age for marriage was set at 18, and it also guaranteed certain rights for both partners, such as divorce and child custody. However, this law is now under attack from a coalition of religiously conservative Shia parties, which currently hold a majority in Iraq's parliament. To understand this shift, one must consider Iraq's history. For decades, the Sunni minority ruled Iraq, even under Saddam Hussein, while the Shia majority was largely excluded from political and social power. This dynamic changed in 2003 with the US invasion, the fall of Saddam Hussein, and the disbandment of the Ba'ath Party, allowing the Shia majority to take control. Since then, some Shia factions have pushed for laws that emphasize their interpretation of Islamic principles, including the proposed reduction of the marriage age. This initiative reflects a broader power play by these religious parties, which have lost some legitimacy over the years. By aligning themselves with a fundamentalist interpretation of Sharia law, they aim to reassert their authority as divinely guided. They advocate for a literalist and ancient interpretation of Islamic teachings, which justifies the proposed minimum marriage age of 9. The implications of this change are alarming. It would not only permit child marriages, but also strip women of their rights in marriage, divorce, and child custody, further entrenching patriarchal norms. Iraq already has one of the highest rates of child marriages, with 28% of girls married before the age of 18. This is especially common in poor and conservative Shia areas in the southern regions of the country. While similar attempts to change this law were thwarted in the past due to widespread protests by women's rights activists, this time the law seems more likely to pass. If enacted, this law could have devastating consequences. Beyond legitimizing child marriages, it would erode women's rights and cement a patriarchal legal system reminiscent of governance in Iran or Taliban-ruled Afghanistan. It could also exacerbate sectarian tensions in Iraq. This proposed law is seen as a demonstration of power by pro-Iranian Shia factions, further alienating the Sunni and Kurdish populations and deepening divisions within the country. Internationally, the proposed law has been condemned by human rights organizations and activists. While the exact date of the parliamentary vote is uncertain, it could happen at any time, and the consequences for Iraqi women and the nation as a whole could be profound. Historically, sectarian conflicts in Iraq have fueled violent extremism, such as the rise of ISIS. The law's passage could worsen these divisions, potentially destabilizing the country even further. This issue highlights not only the dire state of women's rights in Iraq, but also the broader struggles the nation faces in achieving unity and stability. Only time will tell what impact this proposed legislation will have on Iraq's future. The potential consequences of this law extend beyond the immediate erosion of women's rights. It threatens the fragile social fabric of Iraq itself. By pushing such a controversial and regressive policy, the conservative Shia parties risk not only alienating women and reformists within their own communities, but also deepening sectarian divides. The tension between Iraq's Shia, Sunni and Kurdish populations has long been a source of instability, and this law could act as a catalyst for further conflict. Historically, Iraq has been a country marked by sectarian and ethnic diversity. However, these differences have often been manipulated by political elites for power, creating a cycle of mistrust and violence. The Shia parties advocating for this law are perceived by many as aligning themselves too closely with Iran, whose influence in Iraq has grown significantly since the fall of Saddam Hussein. This perception is particularly strong among Sunnis and Kurds, who feel increasingly marginalized. The imposition of laws rooted in conservative religious ideology only serves to underscore these divisions. For Sunni communities, this law represents another example of exclusion, reinforcing the belief that Iraq's Shia leadership prioritizes sectarian interests over national unity. This sense of disenfranchisement has historically pushed some Sunnis toward radicalization, as seen during the rise of ISIS. Similarly, Kurdish communities in the north, who have long sought greater autonomy, may view this as further justification for distancing themselves from Baghdad's centralized government. On a societal level, the normalization of child marriage would have devastating long-term effects. Studies have shown that child marriages trap young girls in cycles of poverty, illiteracy, and dependence. These marriages often lead to early pregnancies, which carry significant health risks for young mothers and their children. Furthermore, they deny girls the opportunity to pursue education and contribute to their communities, perpetuating a cycle of inequality that hinders national development. The law also sends a chilling message to women across Iraq. For decades, women's rights in the country have been eroded by war, sanctions, and political instability. This legislation would mark a dramatic regression, stripping women of the limited protections they currently have and institutionalizing their subjugation under the guise of religious law. Women's rights groups and activists have fought tirelessly against such measures in the past, but they now face an uphill battle against a parliament dominated by conservative factions. Internationally, this law could damage Iraq's reputation and strain its relations with the global community. Human rights organizations, foreign governments, and international institutions have already condemned the proposal, warning of its implications for Iraq's human rights record. This could affect foreign aid, investment, and diplomatic relations, further isolating Iraq at a time when it needs international support to rebuild its economy and infrastructure. Despite these grim prospects, there is still hope for resistance. The two previous attempts to lower the marriage age were defeated due to widespread public outcry, particularly from women's rights organizations, activists, and reform-minded politicians. Protests and advocacy campaigns could again play a crucial role in mobilizing opposition to this law. Social media and international attention may also help pressure the government to reconsider. The fight against this proposed legislation is part of a broader struggle for the soul of Iraq. At its core, this battle is about whether the country will embrace modernity, equality, and justice, or retreat into authoritarianism and sectarianism. For many Iraqis, the stakes couldn't be higher. This isn't just about the rights of women and girls, it's about the kind of nation Iraq wants to be and the values it chooses to uphold. As the situation unfolds, it will be critical for both Iraqis and the international community to remain vigilant and vocal. Women's rights, human rights, and the broader stability of Iraq depend on it. For now, the outcome remains uncertain, but what is clear is that the resistance to this law is about far more than marriage. It's about the fight for dignity, equality, and justice in the face of oppression. If the proposed legislation passes, it could set a dangerous precedent for the erosion of civil rights in Iraq, not only for women but for all citizens who oppose the creeping dominance of religious conservatism in the nation's governance. A critical concern is the broader societal impact, beyond the immediate plight of young girls forced into marriage, on how Iraqis view their personal freedoms and their government's accountability to its people. The role of civil society and protest movements. Civil society in Iraq has historically been a powerful force for change, particularly during moments of national crisis. In recent years, mass protests, often led by young Iraqis and women, have called for an end to corruption, sectarianism, and foreign interference. These movements have demanded reforms that promote equality, transparency, and the protection of human rights. Should this law move closer to enactment, it is likely that activists, women's organizations, and progressive groups will mobilize in resistance. The younger generation, which has increasingly used social media to amplify its voice, may play a pivotal role in bringing both domestic and international attention to the issue. The question remains, however, whether such efforts will be enough to counteract the political dominance of the religious parties currently in power. The international community's role. The international community could also influence the trajectory of this legislation. Western nations, human rights organizations, and the United Nations have repeatedly expressed concern over laws and practices that undermine the rights of women and girls in Iraq. Through diplomatic channels, economic pressure, and public condemnation, these entities can play a role in discouraging the Iraqi government from moving forward with such regressive policies. However, the extent of international leverage is limited. Iraq's current political elite may resist external pressure by framing it as an infringement on national sovereignty or as an attack on Islamic principles. Such rhetoric often resonates with conservative segments of the population, making it politically expedient for leaders to push back against foreign criticism. Additionally, Iraq's ties to Iran complicate the situation. With significant Iranian influence over many Shia political factions in Iraq, the law's proponents may feel emboldened by Tehran's tacit approval. Iran's governance model, which prioritizes theocratic rule, could serve as both a source of inspiration and a shield for those advocating for this legislation in Iraq. The bigger picture: Iraq's fragile stability. The proposed law reflects deeper structural issues within Iraq's governance and society. Since the fall of Saddam Hussein in 2003, Iraq has struggled to build a cohesive national identity. Sectarian politics, corruption, and weak institutions have hindered progress, leaving the country vulnerable to internal divisions and external manipulation. Passing this law could further fragment Iraqi society. The empowerment of religious conservatives at the expense of women's rights and broader civil liberties risks alienating moderate and progressive Iraqis. It could also exacerbate sectarian tensions, as Sunni and Kurdish groups view the move as another step toward a Shia-dominated state governed by religious law. Such fractures could have serious consequences for Iraq's future. The country has already endured years of conflict fueled by sectarian and ethnic divisions, from the civil war that followed the US invasion to the rise of ISIS. The introduction of laws that deepen societal inequalities and alienate large segments of the population risks reigniting these tensions with potentially devastating results. The path forward: hope amid uncertainty. Despite these challenges, Iraq has a history of resilience. Women's rights activists, human rights defenders, and reformists within the country have fought tirelessly to preserve the progress made in previous decades. Their efforts have often been met with hostility and violence, but they have also achieved significant victories, such as blocking earlier attempts to pass similar legislation. To resist this law, these groups will need to build coalitions that cut across sectarian and political lines. Mobilizing public opinion, particularly among Iraq's youth, could be key to countering the influence of conservative religious factions. Engaging with international organizations and leveraging global platforms to highlight the issue may also help amplify their cause. Ultimately, the fight against this legislation is about more than just the minimum age for marriage. It is a struggle for the future of Iraq as a nation. Will it be a country that respects the rights of all its citizens, regardless of gender, religion, or ethnicity? Or will it succumb to a vision of governance that prioritizes the interests of a select few at the expense of the many? As the world watches, the answer to these questions will depend on the courage and determination of those who stand against injustice, both within Iraq and beyond its borders. The stakes are immense, but so too is the potential for change if Iraqis unite to demand a better future.